Hi everyone, my name's Diabudor, and today we're going to revisit one of my previous builds, the Wing of Astel. The Wing of Astel is an intelligence scaling curved sword with the unique Ash of War Nebula, which can do ludicrous amounts of damage when you build for it correctly. In my previous video about this weapon, I made a build which took advantage of the dual curved swords moveset to proc the multi-hit buffs from Millicent's Prosthesis and the Rotten Winged Sword insignia, and then use Nebula while those buffs were still active. It's a nice gimmick, and when it works it hits hard, but it's inconsistent. Enemies have a habit of moving out of the way of Nebula when you try to use it, and oftentimes you won't be able to actually cast Nebula before those multi-hit buffs wear off. However, recently I realized that the Wing of Astel has a much better gimmick to work with. It's charged heavy attacks. The Wing of Astel has a fairly unique feature in that it shoots out a laser when you do a heavy or charged heavy attack. The projectile does pretty good damage, and also has the benefit of doing a bunch of poise damage too. If you land both hits of the two-handed charged heavy attack, and also both projectiles, you'll do a whopping 43 poise damage, which is among the highest poise damage per instance attacks in the entire game. Therefore, I figured that you could use the charged heavy attacks to get stance breaks on mobile enemies, and then blast them with Nebula while they're poise broken, and the results are excellent. So today, I'm going to show you how to make what very well might be Elden Ring's true strongest build, using the Wing of Astel. If you find this video helpful, please leave a like, share the video, and consider subscribing. It really helps me out. To start off, I'm going to give you an overview of the build, including all of its stats, weapons, talismans, armor, spells, and other buffs it uses. Then I'll give you a brief leveling guide so you'll know how to level your stats for this build as you play through the game. And finally, I'll give you a brief gameplay showcase where I'll explain how this build works and how you can get the most out of it. First, let's look at the stats. As usual, I make my builds at level 125 using the Wretch as my starting class. This is just how I prefer to make my builds, and you can bring this build up to any level you want, and your starting class doesn't matter all that much. Our first stat is Vigor. Like I always say, Vigor is the most important stat in Elden Ring regardless of who you are or what your build is, and any completed build should have 60 Vigor, so that's what we've got. It doesn't matter how cool your laser sword is if you have no health and the enemy insta-kills you, so make sure you get 60 Vigor. In my previous version of this build, I only had 40 Vigor because I wanted to get some more intelligence and dexterity for damage, but it's not worth it. You want 60 Vigor. The Vigor is always more valuable than everything else, and that's another reason why I want to remake this build. Up next is Mind. This build relies on using a bunch of buffs and spamming its Ash of War, so we've got 20 Mind for the sake of having a decent amount of FP to work with. If you feel like this isn't quite enough for you, then my advice is to bring an extra blue flask into fights, but if you really want more FP, then I wouldn't recommend going past about 25 Mind. After that comes Endurance. The Wing of Astel is really lightweight at only 2.5 pounds, so we're not going to need much endurance. The heaviest gear we're going to wear requires 16 endurance to remain a medium load, so that's what the build has. If you use one of the lighter armor sets, then you can lower endurance to around 12 or 13, though I'd recommend just keeping it at 16 for the sake of having a bit of extra equip load and stamina to work with regardless. Now come the damage stats. The Wing of Astel scales its magic damage and Ash of War damage with intelligence, so that's our focus. We've got the minimum strength for whatever class you use, because the Wing only requires 7 strength, and every class starts with more than 7 strength. We've got 13 dex, boosted by 5 from Millicent's Prosthesis for a total of 18. The Wing requires 17 dex, and having that extra point gives us slightly more optimal damage than without it. We've got 25 faith for some buffs, and then any leftover points you have go into intelligence. With the Wretch, that came out to 50 intelligence, which is pretty good. If you started with a different class, then you may end up with slightly more or less, but as long as you've got the minimum required 38 intelligence, you'll be fine. Now let's look at the weapons. In addition to the Wing of Astel, we've got the Staff of Loss for casting sorceries. This is more of an Ash of War build than a spell one, so the specific staff really isn't super important, but we're going to be using the Night Comet spell, and the Staff of Loss boosts its damage by 30%, so that's the one I chose, and it also has the benefit of being really lightweight, also at only 2.5 pounds. We've also got the Golden Order seal for casting buff incantations. I chose Golden Order specifically because it scales with both intelligence and faith, and this build has a decent amount of both, so if you decide to use offensive incantations, then that'll probably get the best incant scaling. but we're not using offensive incantations, at least in my version of the build, so it's not super important. In addition to that, the Golden Order seal is also weightless, which makes it a convenient choice for saving a bit of weight. Up next are the Talismans. This build relies on doing magic damage with the Wing of Astel's Ash of War, so it has the Magic Scorpion Charm to increase its magic damage by 12% at the cost of taking 10% more physical damage, and it has the Shard of Alexander to increase its Ash of War damage by 15%. In addition to that, it's also got Millicent's Prosthesis for +5 dex, which helps with the melee damage just a little bit, and provides an increasing damage buff when you hit an enemy multiple times in a short period. The Wing of Astel's charged heavy attacks hit twice, and it's a curved sword, so its light attacks are fast, making this a good choice. And finally, it has the Rotten Wing Sword Insignia, which also provides that multi-hit buff. If you can't get the Rotten one, then the regular Wing Sword Insignia can be used instead. It's just slightly weaker, but as long as you have Millicent's Prosthesis and one of the Wing Sword Insignias, you'll do plenty of damage. I also included a couple alternative talisman sets in the build. The first one just switches the Magic Scorpion Charm out for the Dragon Crest Great Shield Talisman, which increases your physical negation by 20%. This is what I prefer to use against tougher bosses like the ones in the DLC, because they hit hard as fuck, and the extra damage taken from the Scorpion Charm really adds up. Remember, you can't kill the bad guy if the bad guy kills you first, so being more tanky is always a good option to have. There's also a set of early talismans in case you don't have access to stuff like the Shard of Alexander yet, the main one being the Axe Talisman, which will boost your charged heavy attacks by 10%. Like I said earlier, the charged heavy attacks do a ton of damage to begin with, and you want to use them to get stance breaks on the enemy so you can more consistently blast them with Nebula, so the Axe Talisman complements the build nicely. Now let's move on to the armor. My preferred armor set is the Rakshasa set, which provides solid protection. Don't worry about the extra damage taken effect, it's baked into the armor's negation stats, it's not something you have to worry about, trust me. It also has 51 poise and has the special effect of buffing all damage you do by 2% per piece of the set worn, for a total of about 8%. If you don't have the DLC, or you're a lower level and can't quite afford the endurance for the armor, then I also included the Knight set, which provides solid protection and 51 poise. Finally, if you have no self-respect, or if you don't have the DLC but you want the damage buff, you can use the Spellblade set, which sacrifices protection and poise for a buff to Magic Ashes of War, which includes Nebula. It's a 2% buff per piece of the set, so it's not stronger than Rakshasa's armor, but if you don't have the DLC and you want that damage buff, it's there for you. Finally, let's take a look at the spells and other buffs. This is a high intelligence build, so we've got access to most of the sorceries in the game, but I only included a couple of them. This build also has 25 faith, so we get access to some good buff incantations. The three important spells are Blessing's Boon, which gives you health regeneration over time at a rate of 8 health per second for 90 seconds, Golden Vow, which buffs all damage you do by 15% and reduces all damage you take by 10% for 80 seconds, and Terra Magica, which creates a circle on the ground that'll buff your magic damage by 22.5% while you stand inside of it. In addition to that, I included a couple useful sorceries to fill in holes in the Wing of Astel's moveset. There's Night Comet, which is a magic projectile that does a fuckload of damage and gets good range. It's also invisible to enemies, so bosses won't dodge it, and it gets a 30% damage buff from the Staff of Loss, so it'll shred anything you hit it with. I also included Carrion Slicer, which basically turns your staff into a lightsaber. It's fast as fuck and does an obscene amount of magic damage per second, so it's good if you really just need something to die and the Wing of Astel just ain't quite doing the job for whatever reason. You'll also see me use Unseen Form a couple times in the video. I didn't include it in the build because it's kind of a meme, but it can come in handy as you'll see in the gameplay showcase. In the Wondrous Physic, we've got the Opaline Heart tier, which increases all your damage negation by 15% for 3 minutes. Combined with the other buffs and the armor, it'll make you super tanky, and it's great for any build. There's also the Magic Shroud and Crack tier, which increases your magic damage by 20% for 3 minutes, which means Nebula will do some stupid amounts of damage. If you have the DLC and you're not concerned about being tanky, you can optionally swap out the Opaline Heart tier for the Blood-Sucking Crack tier, which increases all damage you do by 20%, but will also drain your health at a rate of 23 points per second at 60 vigor, for 3 minutes. Blessing's Boon helps to offset that a bit, but it's still something you really need to keep an eye on, which is why I personally don't care for it. But if you want to do the highest damage possible, that 20% damage buff is insane. In addition to the spells and Wondrous Physic, I also recommend using Boiled Crab, which is a consumable that increases your physical negation by 20%, making you ridiculously tanky. There are other body buffs like Howl of Shabriri, but that requires 33 points in Faith, and I feel like 25 is already a lot for a build that doesn't even use it to do damage, so I wouldn't use it unless you're going past level 125, which is something I'll talk about in the upcoming leveling guide segment. That concludes the build overview section of this video, so now let's move on to the leveling guide, where I'll show you what order to level up your stats in as you play through the game. We're going to start off at level 65, which is the minimum level I needed to be as a wretch in order to hit all the minimum requirements for everything we're using, except for Night Comet. So we have 40 Vigor, which is super important and is always the first thing you should do on any character. I recommend you just get 40 Vigor pretty much straight away, because it makes the entire rest of the game and making the rest of your build and stuff just way easier. We've got 15 Mind, just to have a little bit of Mind overhead to work with. You can keep that at 10 or lower if you are, trying to make this build at a lower level than 65. We've got 12 Endurance, which is enough to use the early Talismans and the Night set with this loadout, which I talked about in the best gear section of the video. We've got 10 Strength, which is the minimum for the class, because you don't need to put any points into Strength for this build. We've got 12 Dex, which gets boosted by Millicent's Prosthesis to 17, so that you can wield the Wing of Astel. You can bum rush Millicent's quest pretty quickly. It really only takes like half an hour to get her to the Windmill Village, where the biggest hurdle there is killing the Godskin Apostle. And then once you do that, you can kill her at the Windmill Village to get Millicent's Prosthesis. So I consider that to be an early game talisman. We've got 20 Intelligence, which is the minimum required for the Wing of Astel, and we've got 25 Faith, which is the minimum required to use Golden Vow. So if you want to make this build at a lower level, then you can cut out the Faith down to 15 or whatever your minimum is, and if you cut out like the Faith and the Mind, then you can get this build down to like level 35 or whatever, but 65 is just a good milestone for starting this build. After that, we move up to level 80. So at level 80, I kept Vigor at 40, I brought Mind up to 20, just to get that out of the way and have that FP overhead to make casting the buffs more convenient. I brought Endurance up to 16, so that you can wear the full loadout and be in medium load. I put that 1 point into Dex just to get it out of the way, and then I put 5 more points into Intelligence, because that's what I had left over, and we're focusing on leveling Intelligence and Vigor from here on out pretty much. At level 100, I put 5 more points into Vigor, because it's around level 100 that I like to start moving up to 60 Vigor for the end game. I kept all the other stats the same, and I just dumped any other points I had into Intelligence to get it up to 40. Now, to my understanding, 40 isn't actually a relevant Intelligence soft cap for this build. The first Elemental attack power soft cap is at 50 Intelligence, but we wanted to get 38 Intelligence for casting Night Comet, because Night Comet's really strong. By the way, in the meantime, when you're lower than 38 Intelligence, you should use either Great Glintstone Shard or Glintstone Comet Shard instead of Night Comet. Those are good spells to use before that. But anyway, so 40 isn't actually a soft cap, contrary to what you might think, but we're working towards getting Intelligence up to 50, so that's why I put it up to 40, because that's how many points that I had. Moving on past 125, which the build overview was talking about, we move on to level 150. So by level 125, we had 60 Vigor, and there's no point going past 60 Vigor, because that's the last soft cap for it. So we keep Vigor at 60, and then I just pretty much pumped Intelligence all the way up to 75 with all the points that I had, because this build is relying on using Intelligence for magic damage. So obviously this is an Ash of War focused build. Nebula only scales with your Intelligence. The Wing of Astel scales with Dex and Intelligence for its melee attack power, but the Wing of Astel's Ash of War relies only on intelligence for Nebula's damage. So since we're focusing on that, I pumped intelligence. If you want to lean more into doing more melee hits with the Wing of Astel, especially like the charge heavy attacks as they're super strong, that's absolutely a valid thing you can do. And in that case, you'd want to get intelligence up to like 50, like we had, you know, in the build overview, and then you can bring dex up to around 40 or 50, and then focus on leveling them up pretty much evenly after that, and that'll give you optimal melee attack damage. But for the sake of this build, I focused on just intelligence because we are using the Ash of War, which scales just with intelligence. And finally, at level 200, I brought intelligence up to 80 just to get that to the final soft cap and get that out of the way. I brought faith up to 38, so I mentioned at the end of the build overview that at level 33 faith, you can use the Howl of Shabriri incantation. So that increases all damage you do by 25%, but also increases all damage you take by 30%. So if you use it, it'll increase the damage of the Wing of Astel by a lot, because not only is it going to buff the magic damage you do with the Ash of War, but it'll also buff the physical damage you do when you do melee hits like the charge heavy attacks. So if you have the levels for it, it's a really good like risk versus reward type of thing. And so that's why I brought faith up to that. And then we went past 33 up to 38 faith, because that gives you access to the Blessing of the Erd Tree incantation, which is just an upgrade to Blessing's Boon. Blessing's Boon regenerates 8 health per second. Blessing of the Erd Tree regenerates 12 health per second. So it's a significantly stronger healing spell, or health regen spell. And then after that, I didn't really have anything worth putting points into, so I brought Dexterity up to 45, because like I said, that'll improve the damage of the Wing of Astel's melee hits. If you don't care for leveling up the melee hits, then you could bring Intelligence up to 99 just to get the absolute, every last drop out of Nebula damage. But I went with the Dex because I figure it's probably a lot more worthwhile than increasing Nebula's damage by like just another like 2 or 3%, or whatever 99 Intelligence would do. If you want, you could put points into Mind, so that way you have more FP to work with. You can put points into Endurance, and that way you'll have more equip loaded stamina to work with in case you want to, equip more stuff or whatever. But this is what I recommend doing for pretty optimal results on this build. And so that concludes the leveling guide section of this video, and now we're going to move on to the gameplay showcase, where I'll show you how this build works and explain to you how you can get the most out of it. So, as always, I first want to stress how important it is that you use your buffs. Lots of people don't use their buffs. Buffs increase your damage by percentages, and they increase your damage negation by percentages, meaning that they're super effective. So what you want to do for this build is you drink the Wondrous Physic, then you cast Blessing's Boon, then you cast Golden Vow. In this case, I then casted Unseen Form so that I can get a sneak attack on this Godskin Apostle. It's a bit of a meme to use Unseen Form, but, when it comes in handy, it comes in handy, as seen here, because I'm going to be able to get up behind him. Then you cast Terra Magica, drink a blue flask, and then you can start attacking the enemy. So he turned and saw me at the last second, but it didn't matter because I was crouching. That's a little Elden Ring pro tip right there. But yeah, and so basically what you want to do is use those charged heavy attacks that you saw me using there to do a fuckload of poise and magic damage to break the enemy's stance, and then once their stance broken, you can blast them with Nebula to fucking delete them. You saw the Godskin Apostle is pretty skinny, so I was aiming at the ground when I cast Nebula to try and keep it like a little bit tighter close to him, because the Nebula projectiles spread out. That's one of the downsides to it, is that it's not great against smaller enemies because the projectiles spread out. So I was aiming it at the ground, and that keeps them slightly tighter. In this case, when I do it to this Draconic Tree Sentinel in a second, and again, here I am using Unseen Form to sneak up behind him. So you get close to him, cast Terra Magica so that, you're within its radius, because it only affects you while you're standing next to it, and then you do it. You see, I'm trying to hit him on like the broad side, so instead of hitting him from behind, I did it at an angle so that the projectile spread out across the length of his body, you feel me? And that way it's more consistently hitting him with all the damage that Nebula can do. And as you can see, it just fucking deletes stuff when you do that. And then, if you're against like groups of enemies, it's also really good. For example, a couple dogs here, wipe them out with Nebula, no problem. I tried to hit both of these nobles here, but I only got the one because it doesn't get that much range. Another thing you do is the tap heavy attacks, so you don't have to do the full charge for the heavy attacks. You can just tap it and that'll shoot out a laser. So that's good if you want to have a little bit of range on your melee attacks. And you also have access to Night Comet, of course, which does even better range, but that requires using your staff. Something I want to point out, you see that was a running heavy attack and it doesn't shoot a laser, and this is a jumping heavy attack, also doesn't shoot a laser. It's only your standing heavy and charged heavy attacks that will do the laser beam from the sword, so keep that in mind. Another thing I want to point out is just a second ago, you saw me hit this Clean Run Knight with a charged heavy attack from a distance. So I hit her with both of the lasers of the Wing of Astel, but it only did like 700 damage, which is still pretty decent, but it's better if you use it at point blank range, so that way you're hitting with both the lasers and the sword itself for the maximum damage, because most of the damage is still coming from the melee hit of the actual physical sword, you feel me? So it's better if you use it at point blank range, but that little bit of range is nice to have when you're doing like mix-ups and stuff. And keep in mind, you have, access to other spells and stuff too. In that case, I used Night Comet, but I was out of FP, so I only got one cast off. But it did allow me to set her up in here, in this relatively confined space, to hit her with Nebula, and so that worked out pretty well. No fucking clue where those dogs came from. I think they teleported through the walls or something, unless those dogs spawned there and I've never noticed them before. But yeah, that one was weird. So here's another thing I want to demonstrate. Don't get tunnel vision on using Nebula. This is an Ash of War focused build, and preferably you'll use the Ash of War on this Ash of War focused build, but it's not the be-all end-all, and you are not always going to have opportunities to use it, and that's fine, because the Wing of Astel is just a great melee weapon too. So you see here, I'm hardly even trying to go for Nebula, I'm just going for the melee hits, because this guy attacks too fast, and I can't safely get Nebula off. If you get the poise break on him, then that's a good opportunity to cast Nebula. That's our, the gimmick of this build, I guess, is you use the charge heavy attacks, get the stance break, and then blast him with Nebula. But you're not always going to have the opportunity to use Nebula, so don't get like tunnel vision focus on trying to spam it. Use the rest of your moveset that you have with both the sword and the spells that are included in this build. Now, with that said, when you do have good opportunities to use Nebula instead of the charge heavy attacks, you should use Nebula instead of the charge heavy attacks. Here I hit him with the charge heavy attacks just to start off the party and get his ankle bracelet broken. I hit him with Nebula, but he rolls out of the way. But watch, because one of the things about Nebula is that it's one of the best poise DPS sources in the entire game. The Nebula projectiles do a ton of poise damage, and so if you can consistently hit enemies with it, like against big enemies, then Nebula itself can get the poise breaks instead of having to use the charge heavy attacks. So against a huge enemy like this Fire Giant, who has big-ass feet that I can consistently hit with the entire Nebula Ash of War, or in this case, when he brings his head down, I don't quite manage to get enough poise damage because I had just poise broken him in the previous phase. I'm not going to go through a whole explanation of what I mean, but you probably know what I mean. But yeah, so I didn't get the poise break at the very start there, but only 4 Nebulas, it does like 40 something poise damage if the whole thing hits, and it breaks his poise super fast. So it is very strong if you can spam Nebula. So in the build overview, I mentioned using Boiled Crab. I haven't shown that in any clip yet, but here it is. So you'd cast it after Golden Vow, and then you run up to the bad guy and cast Terra Magica. So keep that in mind. I'm using it in this clip because it increases your physical damage negation by 20% for 60 seconds, and I'm using the Spellblade set to show, that it's an effective set that you can use despite being ugly as shit. And the thing about the Spellblade set is that it doesn't provide that much protection, so I wanted to use the Boiled Crab to make sure that I have extra negation for this fight. And so you see, with Placidusax, Nebula is awesome because he's huge, so you can just run right up to him and just blast him with Nebula, and it breaks his stance in 4 casts, and it's awesome. I don't know why I went for a charge heavy attack there. I should have just done the flip-in Nebula. But yeah, so before he's even had a chance to react, I have him at less than half health, and this is on New Game +2, as always. So, you know, it's pretty good. It does a whole bunch of damage. And here's a pro tip for Placidusax. After phase 1, you'll want to start running towards the rim of the arena to get ready for his big super duper laser beam atomic breath attack later on. But yeah, so I hit him with a couple charge heavy attacks, and then I had a chance to hit him with Nebula there, so I did that. And then, you know, he's moving off to do another one of his attacks. Fortunately, he's got a lot of poise, which means that his poise regen delay is pretty long. So you see I'm also using fan daggers, which I need to start mentioning in the build overviews more often. Fan daggers can maintain the enemy's poise health and prevent it from regenerating, so that way you saw there, he didn't even get a chance to get his fucking atomic breath off because I used the fan daggers before he teleported away the first time. That prevented his poise from regenerating, and so when he came back, it was still low, and I was able to poise break him before he got it off. And so there you go. This weapon is awesome. It does fuckloads of damage. It does a ton of poise damage, and it's great. It's super fun to use. The melee attacks are awesome with the charge heavy attack lasers, and it is just an excellent weapon overall. Definitely one of the top 10 weapons in Elden Ring. So yeah, I hope you found this video helpful and or entertaining. Please leave a like, share the video, and consider subscribing because all those things really help me out. My name is Diabedor, and I will catch you later.